I got all I want, and I got all I need, and I got everything. I got you and me. All I want,
Marriage is
I got
the
all I
best.
need.
Hey, welcome back to Marriage is the Best. Last week we were talking about what development is, and we discussed how development is the process of growing and learning across time that leads to maturity, mastery, or competence. And for now, I'm happy with that idea of development. I think that it captures a bunch of the different elements that need to be acknowledged as we talk through marital development, right? It's a process, first and foremost, that there's growing and learning that needs to take place, that takes place across time, and that we're hoping that will lead to maturity, mastery, or competence. Really kind of all three, right? Competence is more of the idea of understanding and engaging and gaining the skills necessary in order to have a successful marriage. Maturity is the idea of deepening one's emotional and psychological knowledge, understanding, and applied wisdom. What is maturity? Man, that's a really good question. When I think about maturity, I guess what I'm thinking about is mostly like emotional maturity. And I think that there's a connection between emotional maturity and relational maturity. So if you were to learn and grow across time and become more mature, your responses change. When I was a 21-year-old getting married and a 22-year-old becoming a father, my responses were pretty poor. They were poor toward my wife at times. They were poor toward my kids at times. There was a lot of immaturity in that season in all regards, from a relational standpoint, from an emotional standpoint, from a financial standpoint, like tons of immaturity in that season. And now I talk to 21 and 22 and 23-year-olds, and I just have to remind myself that I was taking on the world at that point, with like one or two or three kids along my path during that season. So maturity, I guess I would say, is, as I'm thinking about it, is kind of updating your ability to respond in your relationship in healthier and healthier ways. I like that. I like the idea of maturity connected to our ability to respond well, our ability to have self-control. I've got a few couples, maybe even right now, who early on in the relationship, there was an immaturity around alcohol use. And as the individuals in the marriage grew and as the marriage relationship grew, that dependence and insistence around alcohol faded and was moved out of a place of influence in their relationship. And they were able to move beyond the call to alcohol in their lives and move into higher levels of accountability and responsibility and health. And I think maturity maybe is one's, moving into increased accountability, responsibility, and health. Early on in all of our relationships, there is a lack of maturity, a lack of relational maturity. And so to develop from a marital standpoint means growing in our maturity so that we can face each of the stages and overcome each of the tasks and develop each of the skills involved in the different stages of marital development. And one of the things that has us do that is our maturity. And one of the things that might get in the way of our marriage going from one stage of development into the next stage of development is a lack of maturity. Because if we don't engage with the process of growing and learning across time, we fail to grow in the areas that we need to. We fail to learn the things that we need to learn. We fail to develop the skills and capacity and ability to face each of the stages. Then our marital development gets stunted, and we can only achieve a certain level of fulfillment and intimacy within our marriage. And just to kind of jump off of the idea before, if these individuals who I've spoken to had not ever moved beyond their affinity for alcohol and their use of alcohol, their marriage was not going to develop very far as a result of them being stuck in a more immature state of being. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that all mature people, all mature people or all mature marriages or all people in general have the same value or the same priority, or they exercise alcohol in the same way. Like their relationship with alcohol doesn't have to look the exact same way as all these other people. But an immature relationship with alcohol will hijack your ability to grow as an emotional person, as a spiritual person, as a relational person, as an emotional person. If I said it twice, it's probably for emphasis. And so, therefore, it's important to look at a lot of the things that can kind of keep us stunted in our growth as individuals, as well as things that can keep us stunted in our growth within our marriages. So we've got this idea of development, and now we've got this idea of stages of marital development. And we're going to be talking about stage 1, or the honeymoon phase. Honeymoon is one of those things you can find in culture and music. You can find it in lots of books. You can find it in romance novels. You can find it in rom-coms. There's a whole heap of media that kind of lives off and, really capitalizes on this idea of the honeymoon. Kind of early infatuation, early passion, early love, falling in love with one person when you're not really in love with the other person, and the sparks and the music and the camera turning around in circles. There's a ton of media and there's a ton of stories that represent moments in the honeymoon phase of a relationship that kind of dominate culture. I might just go as far as to say that almost all cultural stories live in the honeymoon phase of relationships. And there aren't that many wonderful stories about relationships that stand the test of time, or that grow and mature over time, or kind of represent more of a developmental pattern rather than sparks flying and the fire, getting out of control, or, these different kind of tropes that you'll find in relationships and in media. Now, there are probably plenty of stories that I'm just unaware of that do a good job of capturing kind of marital development or relational development. But I guess I would, from my experience, I should specifically say, from my experience, I would say that the majority of stories that get airtime and that are invested in, or like in, that are portrayed in the media, either have really a focus on the honeymoon phase or a focus on immaturity in a relationship, or just an unhealthy relationship in general. The honeymoon phase of a relationship is not just a trope that you'll find. It is something kind of well established and understood as consistent and well represented even across culture. It's one of those things that you're going to find pretty much in all the honeymoon phase of a relationship is an important phase and is a bit of a dangerous phase early on in the way that a marriage will develop out of the honeymoon. So you can characterize the honeymoon phase of a relationship in kind of these 5 different areas, right? So there's an intense attraction or a fast infatuation, heightened emotional closeness, strong sexual desire, an idealization of the partner, seeing them in a very positive light, an ideal light, and reduced perception of flaws or incompatibilities. When I think back on Rebecca and my experience of our relationship, I definitely feel and see an incredibly intense attraction, really strong sexual desires, heightened emotional closeness, the idealization for sure, and then the reduced perception of flaws or incompatibilities. Now that one is a little questionable for Rebecca because she doesn't have any flaws or incompatibilities, but these other ones for sure were a part of our early phase of relationship. And I think a lot of people will resonate with most of, if not all, of those as they think back, if they can remember back to that really intense first few months up to maybe even the first 2 years. Some of the things that characterized mine and Becca's honeymoon stage would be, staying up super duper late, chatting, being able to have 4 to 6 hour conversations and not feel bored and not feel like time was a thing. Being kind of obsessive in our thoughts and desires for one another. The heightened emotional closeness leading to a lack of health and a lack of, ability to kind of see oneself as separate. I think I failed to differentiate myself from Becca for a very long time because I was caught up in the early stage of our relationship, I was completely caught up in who this other person was and how it felt to not be with them and how all I wanted was to be with them. And when I was with them, all of the intense attraction, infatuation, desire would come out. And it was very much like drugs. I would imagine it would be very much like drugs. And so, yeah, there's an intensity to it. It's interesting. I found as I was doing research on the honeymoon phase of relationship, I found that researchers often compare the brain state of like living in a honeymoon phase, and they compare it to a mild, non-pathological, altered state of consciousness. A mild, non-pathological, altered state of consciousness. So it's basically changing your brain. And it does actually change your brain, like the actual neuroscience, the actual idea that my brain is different. When they looked at brain scans, they can see increased activity in the dopamine reward system, and they can measure elevated levels of dopamine, norepinephrine, and PEA. I don't even know if I want to try and say this, but it's phenylethylamine, something like that, which I guess is referred to as the love chemical. And then reduced activity in areas linked to critical judgment and fear. So all of that serves to explain why there's such emotional highs, why flaws feel so small or almost invisible early on, and why our brains are obsessive about the other person, because the brain is genuinely on a high of chemical, and within a non-pathological altered state of consciousness. So our brains aren't really functioning in the same way, or in the way that they normally would. And, it feels really good and really bad, and it feels crazy at times. And I think this is part of the reason that, like, the idea that love is blind is a thing, is because within the neuroscience and within the brain mapping and the experience of this honeymoon phase, it definitely feels like you are blinded by the experience of the honeymoon phase, by this passionate honeymoon time. And it's very difficult to see clearly who this person is, what this person is, and what this relationship turns into. Now, the honeymoon phase is actually a really important phase of relationship. And you could take a lot of the things that I've said today as maybe like negative things or bad things that you find within the honeymoon phase. But ultimately, the reason that the honeymoon phase is a thing is the honeymoon phase serves as a purpose to drive us to commit to our partners. It drives us to invest in our relationships. It drives us to overcome early obstacles, and it drives us to create a bond, deep, intimate bond with our romantic partners. And those are good things. Commitment formation is really good. Motivation to invest is really good. Overcome early obstacles, things that might shut that relationship down early on. And the bonding, that intimacy, that bonding over time, all of those things serve as a really good, healthy purpose in establishing an early foundation for relationship. So when I talk to couples about their early relationship foundation and what drove them to one another, it's oftentimes an indicator for like where their marriage is at and where their relationship is at currently. So if I ask, how did you guys meet and what was that like for you? And they go off on a story about their early lives together, and they laugh or they smile or they give an affectionate touch. They have memories to share. They work together in producing the story. All of those things serve as anchor points for me as a counselor to kind of hear and absorb and listen to and understand where they're coming from and how they maybe think about each other right now and how they think about each other back then. And if there's a big difference, I used to, think she was cool, and now I am just only annoyed by her, or vice versa. And it is an important kind of data point to understand how their early phase of relationship is currently being thought about and how it has impacted where they are right now. Oftentimes, the issues that a couple is facing was they were present in the early phase of the relationship. And so it's very often not new things, almost never is it new things that couples are bringing into counseling to want to work through. It's almost always started either, in the transition from no kids to some kids, or it started right off the bat. And those are the two stories that I hear primarily. And so the issues that you're blind to in a honeymoon phase are issues that very well may stand the test of time and create those unresolvable conflicts that we've talked about, where not that the two people are broken in a certain way, and in coming together, they create holes within the system, and those holes can't be patched or filled. And so what needs to happen is an ability to dialogue in a gracious and gentle way, and to limit defensiveness within that issue so that the dialogue can occur is necessary. Those issues and those unresolvable conflicts oftentimes are present because of the nature of the two people coming together and the holes that they create when matching personality and when matching family of origin and when matching all of the things. They've created this, this natural hole. And so neither of those things are bad, neither the honeymoon phase and being blind to it, nor the holes that are created. Those are natural, marital, functional, systemic occurrences. Those are normal. It's okay. And so when I think about the honeymoon phase and how important it is in creating early attachment, early immature attachment, and how when it fades, when the chemicals start to kind of wear off and reality kind of starts to set in, there are new tasks and new skills that need to be developed so that a marriage can be healthy. When I talk to people in dating relationships who are good matches and have a good base for a relationship, meaning that the person that they're dating shares some of their interests, the person that they're dating shares some of their values, there's an attraction, there is similar expressions of future goal orientation. When they tick some of the boxes of, okay, so there's some foundational things going well. So you could maybe work out the differences in some of the other areas, but in these 3 or 4 areas that we're pretty sure there's a higher rate of alignment. And that's what you want to see. You want to see kind of that higher rate of alignment within the relationship, even in the honeymoon phase. So when I'm talking to my couples and to the individuals who are coming in for counseling about those things, I often am encouraging them to just enjoy the honeymoon phase, to enjoy the attraction, to enjoy the desire, to enjoy the commitment, to commit, to lean into it, to continue to pursue, to continue to discuss and have the conversations that need to be had across the time, and to just enjoy, be a little bit crazy so that you can make some memories, because this love is blind kind of crazy season only happens for a short season. So within reason, doing some crazy things in order to kind of solidify and memorialize this season of the relationship can be helpful in remembering how it felt and what it was like to move through this. So Becca and I did some pretty crazy things during our honeymoon phase, and we often talk about those different things. We talk about falling asleep on a Skype call and waking up the next morning to each other. We talk about Thursday nights being our conversational night at college because it was the only night that we both had free. And we remember staying up until all the wee hours of the night in the coffee shop at Crown College And then, me walking her back to her dorm and then going up to Faith. And we talk about, dates that we had that were just ridiculous. We talk about different, expressions of passion and desire that occurred during that season and how ridiculous we were as human beings, how absolutely ridiculous we were. We talk about those things. We remember those things. We think back fondly on those things, and we remind each other of those early passions and desires and expressions. And it's a beautiful thing to be able to kind of hold on to some of that and to bring it out in our relationship, to bring it forward in our relationship as we move through the goods and the bads and the uglies and the ups and the downs and the stress and the parenting and all of that. That reminds us of a season where we were very underdeveloped, where we were just passion and hormone and all of those things. And we weren't necessarily, logic and responsibility and accountability and reasonable living. And so you don't want to stay in the honeymoon phase, nor can you. It's impossible to do so. Your body would run out of chemical probably, and it would probably break in some way if you try to manufacture that. And there's no way to do it, naturally to like stay in that. But it's also wouldn't be healthy for us as people, for us as a society, for us as moving forward in our lives as individuals. It's not healthy to stay in that it wouldn't be healthy to stay in it the whole relationship. And in fact, we really need to be looking forward toward the next season of relationship, the next stage of relationship, not with trepidation, but with excitement. I don't like that at all. I hate that. Even though the honeymoon phase has its flaws and has its downsides, but it's also really beautiful and foundational in one's experience of their relationship. It also can provide a lot of love moving forward, but it's not enough just in and of itself to create a healthy long-term marriage. You need other things. You need new skills, new seasons and stages of development in order to learn and grow and mature and build the life that is available, build the life that you really want to be building toward increased responsibility and health. And the honeymoon phase does not encourage either of those things. So if you are in a honeymoon phase of relationship, I would say enjoy it to its fullest. Be goofy within reason, and even though you're probably unreasonable, and make some really good, healthy, strong memories. Continue to commit and pursue and ask the right questions. There's lots of books on questions and relationships. If you've been married for a really long time, maybe remind yourself what the honeymoon phase was like for you, what you loved about your spouse, what you were passionate about your spouse, how attracted you were to your spouse, all of those things. Keep that in mind and maybe even draw that forward so that your spouse can know how that you were thinking about them and you remembered how you thought about them in that season. I think that's there's some really cool value there. It's important to know that the honeymoon season comes to an end, and that's a good thing. It's not a bad thing. It could be a painful thing, but it's not necessarily a bad thing. And that moving through a good honeymoon phase and being able to transition into the next stage of relationship that we'll probably talk about next week is going to be really important and really healthy. And knowing that it's normal and knowing that it's natural, I hope will take the edge off of the reality of it. And, for those of you who have been married a long time, I think that it's important to know that the honeymoon phase can still serve a good, healthy purpose for you and your relationship right now if you go back and if you reminisce and if you think about it and think through that. And we'll continue to talk through the next seasons and stages of relationship and the skills and the abilities that one needs in order to move through it. This is the end.